Did your family have favorites? If so, were you the favorite or someone else?
When people talk about family, they usually describe it as a safe place, a place where you can fall apart and still be accepted, where you can fail and still be loved, where you can come back home after years of mistakes and still find the door open. But that was never the kind of family I grew up in, and if I am being completely honest, I knew that fact before I was old enough to spell my own name, because my mother had always been very clear about where her pride rested, and it certainly was. Not with me. The night of her retirement celebration should have been one of those rare occasions where grudges were buried, where people gathered to honor the years of sacrifice and effort, and where children, both of them, stood side by side to recognize the woman who had raised them. But the truth is, I walked into that room knowing there was no real balance in her eyes, that I was there as the spare, as the one who never quite measured up, while my brother was the golden child who could do no wrong even when he did everything wrong. We were sitting at a long table surrounded by her friends from work, our extended family, even neighbors who had watched us grow up, and as the night went on, people made little speeches about her dedication and hard work, about how she had given everything to her career while still being a mother, and I kept sipping my drink, smiling politely, nodding at the right times, but inside I was bracing myself, because I knew her well enough to know she would never end an evening like that without slipping in some sharp jab, some public declaration of who she considered worthy and who she considered a disappointment. And of course, when she finally stood, glass in hand, with that familiar look of authority that she always carried even at the dinner table, she said words I had heard in 100 different forms before. But this time the sting was sharper because she dressed it up as a toast, as a final bow to her career and her family life, to the child who made me proud every single day. She smiled as she said it, her voice steady, her eyes shining, and people clapped politely, lifting their glasses without realizing what had just been said. I sat there frozen, the words echoing in my ears like someone had hit me in the chest with something heavy, because it was not a slip of the tongue, not a vague comment anyone could misinterpret. It was deliberate, clear, and pointed, as if to remind me one last time in front of everyone that her pride belonged entirely to my brother, not me. And the worst part was that people glanced in his direction, chuckling, nodding, clinking their glasses with his, and for a split second, I felt that familiar urge to shrink into myself, to disappear, to let it pass the way I had let it pass 1,000 times before. But something in me snapped that night, something I had been holding down for years, because I was tired of letting her rewrite the story of who I was and what I had accomplished. Tired of sitting quietly while my achievements were brushed aside like crumbs on a tablecloth. Tired of being cast as the disappointment even when I had worked harder, fought longer, and sacrificed more than the so-called pride of the family. I kept a steady smile on my face because I knew no one else in that room understood what was really happening. To them, it was just a sweet moment, a mother acknowledging her child, but to me, it was the final straw. The last drop in a bucket that had been overflowing for years, and that's when I remembered what I had tucked into my bag before I left my house earlier that evening. It wasn't an accident that I brought it, not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a letter, sealed, official, heavy with the kind of truth that had the power to turn her words inside out, and when she lifted her glass with that smug little smile, I felt my hand brush against the edge of it in my purse, and I knew right then and there that I wasn't going to swallow this one, not tonight. I leaned back in my chair, watching the moment play out, listening to the clinking of glasses and the polite laughter, and I thought about how many times I had stood on the sidelines of my own life, letting her diminish me, letting her narrative define me. And I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment to show her and everyone else that pride built on lies and favoritism could crumble in a second. The room kept moving around me, waiters clearing plates, people chatting about their memories of her career, and she sat down glowing from her own little performance, proud of her parting shot, but she had no idea that the stage she had just set was mine to take. And unlike her, I wasn't going to do it with empty words. I was going to do it with something she couldn't smile her way out of. So when the applause died down and the clinking of glasses faded into a dull hum, I turned my chair slightly toward her, reached into my bag, and felt the paper between my fingers, crisp and undeniable, and as I placed it on the table in front of me, I caught her eye and held it long enough for her to understand that whatever came next was not going to be another quiet surrender on my part. I smiled politely, the way she always told me to when people were watching, but in my chest, there was this steady thrum of defiance I had never let her see before, and while she laughed at some comment made by one of her colleagues, I tapped the envelope lightly with my finger and thought to myself, not this time, not anymore. Because the letter in my hand was not just paper, it was the truth she had tried so hard to ignore, and it carried the weight of everything she had never wanted to admit about her perfect child, the one she had just toasted in front of everyone. And when she finally looked at me, puzzled by the expression on my face, I leaned in just enough so she could hear me over the noise of the room, and I whispered, strange thing to say, considering what came in the mail yesterday. Her smile faltered for the first time all night. Her eyes flicked down to the envelope, and for once, I felt the power shift between us, subtle but real, like a crack forming in a wall that had stood solid my whole life. I slid the letter across the table toward her, never breaking eye contact, and in that moment, I knew there was no going back, no way to undo what I had just set in motion, but for the first time, I didn't care. Because it wasn't about pleasing her anymore. It was about finally making her see me and making everyone else in that room see the truth she had spent a lifetime covering up. And as she reached for the envelope with a hand that suddenly didn't look as steady as it had when she raised her glass, I thought to myself, this is it. This is the moment everything changes. People assume that when a mother favors one child over another, it must be subtle, maybe something only the children themselves notice, like who gets hugged a little tighter or who gets asked about their day first. But in my house it was never subtle. It was loud and it was constant, and by the time I was 10 years old, I could already predict how every family event would go, because no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked or what I achieved, my brother Daniel was always the one who got the spotlight, the praise, the pat on the back, while I was treated like the supporting character in my own home. I can remember moments as clearly as if they had happened yesterday, moments that should have belonged to me, but somehow ended up twisted into another chance for my mother to gush about Daniel. Like when I graduated college with honors after working 2 jobs to pay my way through. And she stood there clapping politely, but didn't even manage to take a picture with me because she was too busy telling relatives about Daniel's new job at a company where he lasted less than 6 months, or when I bought my first house all on my own after saving for years, and instead of congratulating me, she said something about how it was nice, but not nearly as impressive as the condo Daniel's boss had helped him finance, even though everyone knew he had barely scraped together the down payment. The thing is, I stopped expecting her approval a long time ago, but I never stopped noticing its absence, and when you spend your whole life being told indirectly and directly that you're not the one she's proud of, it leaves a mark that doesn't fade with age. It just hardens into something heavier, like a chip on your shoulder you learn to carry, because you know it will never go away. I think that's why the toast at her retirement celebration hit me the way it did, because it wasn't just one careless sentence, it was the culmination of years of the same message hammered into me. Daniel is the pride, you are the afterthought. Even at smaller family dinners, I would try to share updates from my life, maybe something at work or something I was excited about, and she had this way of shutting it down without even realizing she was doing it. By changing the subject to Daniel or by giving me a quick nod and moving on, and over time it taught me to keep things to myself, to stop offering pieces of my life to someone who had already decided they weren't worth holding. And yet, even with all that history, there was a part of me that kept waiting for the day she might surprise me, the day she might finally look at me the way she looked at him, like I mattered. But if I am being brutally honest, what had been building up inside me over the years wasn't just disappointment anymore, it was anger, and it wasn't just about me, it was about the lies she kept telling herself and everyone else about Daniel. Because the truth was, he wasn't the man she made him out to be, not by a long shot. Daniel was charming, yes, and he knew how to make people laugh, but beneath all of that he had a trail of failures and selfish decisions that she never seemed willing to admit, and when I got that letter in the mail, It was like the universe had finally handed me the piece of evidence I had been waiting for all my life, the proof that her golden boy wasn't golden at all. I won't say yet what the letter said, because at that point even I hadn't decided whether I would use it or not, but what I can tell you is that when I read it, I sat at my kitchen table for almost an hour in silence, staring at the words, feeling this strange combination of shock and validation, because it confirmed what I had known deep down for years. Daniel was not the man she wanted the world to believe he was, and protecting his image had come at the cost of my dignity more times than I could count. So when she raised her glass that night and made her little toast, I didn't see just another round of favoritism. I saw the perfect setup, the perfect contrast between the picture she wanted to paint and the reality that was sitting in my bag. Sealed and undeniable. I thought about all the dinners where I stayed quiet, all the birthdays where she forgot to call me because she was too busy helping Daniel with something trivial, all the times she told me I was being dramatic when I pointed out the imbalance. And it was like everything inside me aligned in that moment, telling me that this was not the night to shrink. This was the night to finally tip the scales. The funny part is, I don't think anyone else at that party had a clue about the history between us, because from the outside, we looked like a perfectly normal family, and she played her role so well. The doting mother who had sacrificed everything for her children, but inside our walls, the truth was messier, crueler, and I had carried that truth like a stone in my pocket, heavy but hidden, waiting for the right moment to pull it out and place it on the table where everyone could see it. And so, as I sat there with the letter pressed against my palm, I knew I had a choice. I could let the night end the way it always did, with me invisible and her glowing in her pride for Daniel, or I could finally take the power back, not by yelling, not by causing a scene, but by quietly placing the truth in her hands and letting the weight of it speak louder than anything I could ever say. That's why, when the laughter from her toast died down and the conversations resumed, I felt this steady calm settle over me, because I knew I was done waiting for her to see me, done hoping for recognition that was never going to come, and in that clarity, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in silence, in patience, in the simple act of finally saying enough. And as I tapped my finger against that envelope, watching her chat and laugh like she had won something, I made up my mind. She was about to find out exactly what her pride had been worth, and the best part was that it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from her own golden child, in black and white, stamped and signed, undeniable. The envelope was right there between the dessert menus and the centerpiece, like it had every right to sit among the polite decorations and the safe conversation. And even though I had set it down as quietly as possible because I did not want theatrics for the sake of theatrics, I wanted truth to do the heavy lifting. I could tell from the slight shift in the air at our end of the table that a few people had noticed something had changed, the way people do when they do not yet know what they are reacting to, but their bodies register it anyway, and I let that tiny ripple work for me while my mother kept her smile pinned in place as if nothing in the world could unsettle her. I did not snatch the envelope or wave it around like a flag because I was not trying to humiliate her in front of strangers for sport, and I was not out for a cheap victory that would make me feel good for an hour and miserable for a year. I was after something cleaner and harder, which was to put the truth where she could not hide from it, and to do it at the exact moment she had chosen to rewrite the story of our family one more time, and that meant patience, that meant letting the noise dim. On its own, that meant waiting until her glass touched the table and her laughter landed before I nudged the envelope forward with one finger and met her eyes with a look that told her this was not a request, it was a turn in the road. She glanced down the way people glance at a bill they do not want to pay, quick and dismissive, and then she looked back at me with that faint warning I knew too well, the one that said not now, not here, not in front of people. And I kept my voice soft because I did not need volume to make the point, saying that I thought it would mean more if she opened it while the memories were still being passed around and while the stories were still sweet, because the timing was kind of the point, and although her smile did not move, her eyes cooled by a few degrees, and she reached out with the same careful hand she had used for her glass a few minutes earlier and drew the envelope toward her as if distance might change the contents. Across the room, Daniel was doing his usual circuit, one eye on his reflection in the window and one on the crowd for people he needed something from. Telling a funny story with his hands and drawing a pretty big laugh from a table of my mother's coworkers who always loved him because he made them feel young and light. And the sight of him floating through the evening like a helium balloon made me remember why I had brought the letter in the first place, because without something undeniable in my hand, he would have charmed his way through yet another uncomfortable truth while my mother clapped for him and scolded me for stirring up drama, and I was done playing that part. She slit the envelope with a butter knife, which felt almost symbolic in a way I did not comment on because I had promised myself I would not make this dramatic for the sake of audience effect. And when she slid the single page out, she glanced automatically at the letterhead, and I saw it hit her before a single word had been read, that small stiffening around the mouth that she tries to smooth over. The tiny pause in her breath that only the children of a woman like her would recognize, and then she started to read for real, not the surface skim she gives everything that does not fit her narrative, but the focused reading you do when your brain is already working to outmaneuver what your eyes are seeing. I did not lean in. I did not try to point out a paragraph like a prosecutor. I just took a sip of water and waited, because I knew the letter was clear enough that it did not need my help. And as the silence widened around us, it drew a few more eyes from nearby tables, the kind of quick glance people exchange when they can feel a moment teetering, but are not yet sure which way it will fall. And I let that tension do its work while I thought about the years of being told to keep the peace, to let small things go, to be the bigger person, all of which sounded noble until you realized that the piece was just a cover for her favorite story and that the small things were actually my life. She made it to the second paragraph and her hand trembled, not dramatically, just enough that the paper rustled, and she set it down on the table as if it had suddenly become heavier than it had been a minute earlier. And she looked at me in a way she never had before, not angry, not scolding, but searching for the move that would get her out of this without losing face, and I could see the options crossing her mind one after another: deny, deflect, downgrade. And then the one she hates most: admit. And I let her sit in that, because for once it was not my job to give her the line that would rescue the moment. I said that I had not written a word of it, that I had not made a call or whispered in anyone's ear, that it had arrived in my mailbox by certified mail with my name on it, because sometimes the world chooses the one person who will not pretend the sky is a different color. And I added that I thought it would be kinder to hand it to her quietly rather than stand when she toasted Daniel and repeat what she had said for the room with a different ending, and that was not a threat, it was simply the truth about the fork in the road I had been given. She pressed her lips together and told me that this was not the place, and I said that she had made it the place the moment she lifted her glass and declared her pride belonged to one child in a room where both her children were sitting. And it was a small mercy that I had chosen paper instead of a microphone, and I felt that line land because a couple of people who had not been listening turned their heads, and the host up front paused before announcing the slideshow, and even Daniel finally looked over, curiosity first, then concern, then calculation. I did not ask my mother to read it aloud because that would have been cruelty dressed up as justice, and I do not need cruelty to win, but I did ask her to confirm one simple thing, which was whether she still wanted to stand by the toast she had just made or whether, given the new information, she wanted to amend it. And I gave her the cleanest out I could offer by suggesting that she could simply raise her glass and say she was proud of both her children and would be taking family matters off the program for the rest of the evening, and that would have been enough for me. It really would have, because all I have ever wanted was to stop being erased in my own family. She looked at Daniel, then at the letter, then at me, and in that little triangle of glances hung the whole history of our house. The rule that his image must be protected at all costs, and the expectation that I would swallow whatever tasted bad so the picture stayed pretty, and I let the silence grow just long enough that the room felt it, and then, because I had promised myself there would be a move at every step and not just a threat, I tapped my glass once, not hard, just enough to get attention, and I said, calm and steady, that before the slideshow I had a quick correction to a toast, and that if anyone wanted context my mother had it in writing in her hand. It was not a scream, it was not a scene, it was simply the cleanest line I could draw between the story she had told and the facts she was holding, and it did exactly what I hoped it would do, which was to shift the weight of the moment off my shoulders and onto hers. And as the room quieted in that awkward, respectful way people do when they realize they might be witnessing something real, she lifted the paper again with fingers that were not quite steady. And I watched her make the choice between doubling down and stepping back, knowing that whichever way she went, the version of our family that she curated like a museum exhibit was not going to survive this night intact. I had promised myself that if this moment ever came, I would not perform it like some courtroom drama where people clap at the end and then go back to their lives untouched. So when my mother stared at the letterhead and then at the first paragraph and her face shifted in that tiny, almost invisible way that tells you the story in her head is colliding with the facts on the page, I kept my voice steady and my posture calm because I wanted her to hear every word without the shield of theatrics. And I said that before she decided whether to double down on that toast she had just made about the child who made her proud every day, she might want to finish the second paragraph because that was where the part started about suspicious transfers from her accounts that were repeatedly authorized from an address connected to Daniel and disguised as consulting reimbursements, which would be a neat trick if she had actually hired her own son as a vendor and then forgotten to mention it to anyone, including the accountant who files her taxes. She did not look at me when I said it. She kept her eyes on the page like the words might change if she stared long enough. And I let her have that beat because I know what it feels like to watch the version of your life that you have defended with your whole chest begin to wobble. And then I told her what the letter was, not my opinion, not gossip, but a formal notice from the bank's Fraud and Elder Protection Unit, sent by certified mail to me as the secondary contact listed on her profile. From years ago when I helped her reset a password after she locked herself out, a letter triggered automatically by their internal monitoring after a pattern of transfers flagged as caregiver exploitation, with a temporary hold already placed on outgoing wires and a request that she confirm who had access to her logins and whether any third party had been authorized to move funds from the retirement payout she was about to receive. She finally looked up at me when I said retirement payout, as if I had spoken another language, and I told her that yes, the letter used that phrase, and that yes, the bank had contacted the state's Adult Protective Services hotline in line with their legal duty to report when there is a pattern they cannot ignore, and that the only reason the envelope had found me before it found her was because the bank had her mailing address on file as the house where she has not lived since she moved to the condo. But the contact of record for urgent notices was mine because I was the one who set up that feature after she got locked out the third time and asked me to handle it for her, and that no, I had not called anyone, I had not written anyone. I had not set anything in motion except to bring the truth with me when I realized she was going to make this night into yet another commercial for Daniel. Across the room, Daniel clocked that something was happening and started walking toward us with that friendly, concerned face he wears like a name tag, ready to smooth, ready to deflect, ready to tell a story about a misunderstanding at the bank or some automatic scheduled thing that he had meant to undo, and I could feel the old script trying to boot up in my head. The one where he dazzles and she forgives, and I become the difficult one for insisting that facts matter, so I stood before he got to the table and I tapped my glass once and I said to the room in a voice clear enough to cut through the low chatter that I needed a quick correction to the earlier toast, and that it would be short, and that it mattered. And what happened next is the part one will remember when I am old, because it was the first time in my life that I did not bend even a little. I said that families can be complicated and that bragging is easy but accountability is harder, and that I had placed in my mother's hands a certified letter she had not yet received at her new address. A letter that raised questions about how money was being moved and by whom, and that out of respect for her and for every person in this room who contributed to the gift table or planned to, I was asking for a small practical change, which was that all gifts be written to her legal name only and delivered to the event coordinator for deposit directly into an account that required her personal appearance and identification, not to anyone acting on her behalf, not to any intermediary, not to any consulting arrangement. And if anyone had already sealed an envelope with cash, We would privately exchange it for a check at the end of the night without fuss, because we were not going to let a celebration become an opportunity for someone else to manage her money under the cover of love. There was a rustle, a shifting of chairs, the sound of people not sure whether to look at me or at her, and Daniel arrived at my elbow with a laugh that sounded a little too bright and a line ready about banking paranoia and algorithms that flag ordinary transfers. And he said, of course, he had helped our mother with some online things because she is not exactly a tech wizard, and I let him finish, because I have learned that if you cut him off he doubles in volume, and then I handed him a copy I had printed before I left the house because I do not do scenes without receipts anymore, and I asked him a simple question that did not require theatrics, which was whether he had ever been a formal vendor for our mother or held a power of attorney. And when he tried to pivot to a half answer about family helping family, I asked him again, slowly and clearly, and then I turned to my mother and said that the bank was asking for exactly that clarity, not stories, not feelings, just the basic facts of who has the keys and who is opening the doors. My mother's lips were pressed tight the way they get when she wants to be angry, but the facts make it risky, and for a long second I watched her try to decide if protecting Daniel's image was worth stepping into a mess that would stain her too. And I gave her an exit she could live with because winning at any cost is not what I want, and I said that all she had to do right now, tonight, was to amend her toast and say she was proud of both her children and that she would be handling her own retirement funds personally, and that we would take the letter outside in 10 minutes and call the number on the page together so she would not have to make that call alone, and if she wanted me to step away after that I would. But I would not let this room become another stage where Daniel's charm bought him access to things that do not belong to him. Daniel reached for the paper like he meant to take it back, and I slid my hand over the top of it because I am done handing him my trust on demand. And he said I was making a spectacle, and I said that what I was doing was the opposite. I was closing the curtain on the spectacle that has been our family for years, and if he wanted quiet, then quiet would start with no more transfers and no more passwords and no more sudden new accounts. And I reminded him that the hold described in the letter was already in place, which meant his window was actually closing as we stood here, and that if he had explanations this was the moment to lay them out, not to me but to her. She looked at him then the way she used to look at me when something went wrong and she needed someone to carry the blame, but the paper in her hand made that old move heavier and slower. And I watched the calculation move across her face before it softened into something like fear, and then, without drama, she lifted her glass, as if the room had not been holding its breath, and said that she needed to say one more thing. And I felt every muscle in my back go taut because I did not know if she would choose the lie she lived in or the truth that might save her. She lifted her glass with the same controlled posture she uses for everything that matters to her image. And for a long suspended second where I could hear the room settle around us and feel Daniel hovering at my shoulder like he always does when he thinks a performance will save him, I did not know which version of my mother was going to speak. The one who collects compliments like beads and guards them with both hands, or the one who hides in the facts when she has no other place to go. And when she finally spoke, her voice steady but thinner at the edges, she said that she needed to correct something, that she should have said she was proud of both her children, that family pride is not a contest and not a slogan for a party, and that from this moment forward she would be handling her own retirement money personally, with checks made out only to her legal name and delivered to the coordinator at the front table, and there was nothing fancy in the statement and no extra sugar to make it go down easier, just the plain adjustment of a woman who could feel a cliff under her feet and decided to back up. The room did that awkward half-clap people do when they want to be respectful without stepping into a family's living room in public, and the host jumped in quickly with a cheerful note about the slideshow and the cake so the air could move again. And I watched as envelopes were redirected to the coordinator and questions were whispered about whether they should cross out what they had written and fix it, and I saw Daniel's face reorganize itself in real time, going from amused confidence to understanding that the old channel he used for easy access had just been closed with one sentence and a line at a table, and I will not lie, there was a calm in me I had never felt around him. The kind of calm that shows up after you stop asking for permission to protect someone you love. My mother did not sit. She touched my sleeve and said we should step outside for a call, and I followed her into the corridor where the sound of the party was a muffled hum. And we used the number on the letter and gave the case reference and answered questions that were boring and necessary. And she listened while the woman on the line explained the temporary holds and the steps to remove unauthorized online devices and the option to add dual verification for transfers above a threshold. And, to her credit, my mother did not argue or look for a shortcut. She said yes to the holds and yes to the audit and yes to an appointment at the branch in the morning. And she repeated the part about gifts going straight to her account so the bank could flag anything unusual before $1 was moved. When the call ended, she stayed very still and asked me, not accusing and not warm, why I had done it this way and not in a quiet kitchen on a Sunday, and I told her the truth she hates, which is that quiet kitchens had never helped me before because quiet kitchens are where she rewrites the story and hands me the broom, and I said I was done cleaning what I had not spilled. And that if she wanted the benefit of my help, she would also have to accept the cost of my boundary, which is that I would not disappear so the picture could look good, and I expected her to snap or freeze me out the way she has many times, but instead she nodded once and said that the letter had scared her more than anything I had ever said, and that the scariest part was not the bank, but the part in her head that had known something was off and had chosen not to look too closely because looking might make it real. And it is not an apology, yet it is closer to the truth than I have ever heard from her. So I took it. Daniel found us there with that mix of hurt and charm he uses like gasoline. And he went straight into one of those soft explanations about trying to help and how the bank's language always sounds harsher than the reality, and how he had set up things temporarily while she transitioned from payroll to retirement disbursements. And he reached for my mother's worry like he always does because worry is the door he knows how to open, and I did not raise my voice or list every moment I could have listed. I just asked him to show the formal document that made him a vendor or an agent or a power of attorney, and when he said family does not need forms, I said banks do, the state does, the people who brought gifts do, and my mother does. And I offered him a way to be useful that was not about access, which was to stand beside her at the branch tomorrow and answer only when she asked, and to return any passwords he had in his notes and any cards he had in his wallet that were not in his name. And if he wanted to help after that, he could mow her schedule or drive her to appointments or move boxes, the kind of help that does not require a login. He tried the old line about me making a spectacle, and I reminded him quietly that I had walked in with paper and a plan that protected our mother without a scene, and that the only reason anyone heard my voice in that room was because she used hers first to crown a favorite like it was sport, and he looked at my mother to collect the backup he has always counted on and found a different expression than he expected. Not betrayal and not rage, just the kind of tired that makes a person choose the simplest rule because everything else is too heavy, and she told him that until the audit was done there would be no transfers and no logins and no explanations given to anyone but the bank, and then she did something I did not see coming, which was to hand him her keys to copy the tag for the garage on his way out, and then to take them back before he could slip the ring into his pocket. A tiny practical move that said she had finally learned what access looks like when you are not watching. We went back inside, and the slideshow rolled, and people smiled at photos and stories and the kind of memories that do not require anyone to pick a favorite, and where I might have once sat there tasting bitterness, I felt something steadier. Not joy exactly, but the relief of a plan landing on its feet, because the gifts were now queued for a deposit she would make herself. The bank was waiting for her in the morning with a fraud team and a patient checklist. The passwords would be reset. The devices would be cleared, and the transfers would be blocked until a human being in a branch confirmed otherwise, and all of that had happened without me screaming or flipping a table or becoming the villain in my own family. Which is not a small thing for someone who has always been cast as the difficult one for insisting that facts are not attacks. At the door when the night finally exhaled, my mother looked at me like she was trying out a new pair of glasses, not sentimental, not warm, but accurate in a way that felt new, and she said thank you in a voice that did not have any sugar on it. And I said you are welcome in a voice that did not ask for anything in return, and Daniel brushed past with a quick promise to call tomorrow that sounded less like a promise and more like a habit he might not be allowed to keep, and if you want to bow on it, I cannot give you one, because families do not change on the spot, and I am not naive enough to expect that one letter will unlodge decades of training. But here is what I know and what matters to me. The money is safe. The rules are written in a place where charm cannot erase them. The toast was corrected in the same room where it was wrong, and for once I did not leave feeling like I had swallowed my own voice for peace I did not agree to. So if you ask me whether it was too far, whether it was harsh to bring paper to a party, I will tell you it was the gentlest hard thing I have ever done, because it did not humiliate her, and it did not hurt him beyond the pain of being told no. And it did exactly what I needed it to do, which was to turn the lights on and make the rules visible, and if there are still pieces to pick up later then we will pick them up later, but the version of our family where I stand quiet while a toast writes me out and a smile opens a safe is over, and that is the victory I am keeping, even if nothing else changes, even if tomorrow is messy, because the last move was mine, it was clean, and it held.